Mm. It was a very ominous see you on the other side.
Great. Hello, everyone. It's nice to see you all here. This is our day, and this is the Forbes 30 under 30 panel. My name is Yuro Wong. I'm a first-year historian at Christchurch, and I'll be moderating this panel. To just quickly introduce the panel and our participants, this panel is part of the Oxford Inspires 2021 conference, and the panelists are recent Forbes 30 under 30 winners. This panel will seek to give the audience a first-hand look at individuals who have achieved significant success in entrepreneurship in the business world early in their careers, and provide both inspiration and practical advice on how Oxford students can pursue their own entrepreneurial goals. Now, to quickly introduce our speakers, we have Natalia, who's the Vice President of European Equity Strategy at JP Morgan Private Bank. We have Parry, who's a CEO at the engineering company. And we have Anthony, co-founder and CEO at Stash. Welcome, everyone. And I guess my first question to just sort of start us off is to really introduce yourself. What is your story? Natalia, would you like to kick us off?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, and very good morning to everyone. My name is Natalia, and my career is all about investments and global stock market. Look, I'm not an entrepreneur, but really, the personal traits that you need to show to personal brand that you need to build is very similar to the one that you have in the entrepreneurship world. So I'm Vice President and European Equity Strategist at JP Morgan Private Bank. I moved to the UK from Ukraine back in 2012 to do my master's in finance with the University of Warwick. A year later, I found my very first job in the UK as an equity analyst at a Swiss bank, Mirabeau. I was looking into different companies, doing equity research, and trying to find the best investment ideas. At the same time, I also managed to get my CFA and became a CFA charter holder, and I started volunteering for various regional activities and competitions. I made to the Forbes 30 under 30 list in 2018 under finance category, and in 2020, I did my Oxford Executive Leadership with the University of Oxford. I'm extremely delighted to be here to share my learnings and my thoughts with all of you. Thank you very much for inviting.
Great, thank you so much. Anthony, would you like to take us next?
Sure. I'll give you a brief introduction to me. I'm Anthony, obviously. 5 or 6 years ago, I was maybe like some of you. I'm not sure how many are current students at Oxford, but I was studying at Keble College. I studied PPE, and I actually met my co-founder. He was my roommate for a couple of years while I was at uni. After leaving, we knew that we kind of wanted to do something in the kind of entrepreneurship space. So we kind of had our eyes out for ideas. And I was living with my brother between Euston and King's Cross. And we just always had people asking to leave their stuff with us. And so we were like, this is it. This is the big one. We're going to make a platform that lets people leave stuff in people's homes. That was not the big one. But it kind of nudged us in the right direction. And we ended up building a platform for short-term storage with local businesses. Primary use case being when you've stayed at an Airbnb and they kick you out early. And the businesses that we work with primarily now are more kind of mid-range hotels. So one of our largest partners is Premier Inn. We're excited for them to kind of like open up again. And the platform that we found is called Stasher, stasher.com. Have a look. And yeah, the obvious thought then is, how did COVID affect that? It's been a slow year, and in the time off, we've actually founded a social enterprise called 3points.green that lets you offset your carbon footprint for £3.25 a month. And yeah, I think that's an introduction to me. We actually were on the Forbes list in 2020, so that actually totally coincided with COVID. So we haven't actually attended any of the live events yet.
Last but not least, Parry.
Hey, so I'm Parry. I'm the founder and CEO of the engineering company. We have a sort of a kind of wild story. I am not an Oxford student. I'm an Imperial student. I'm a mechanical engineer. And I became a mechanical engineer because I wanted to design and invent stuff that mattered. I wanted to help push the human race forward. But when I went into the industry, I went to places like BAE Systems, like Future Tech Division at BP. it was a bit of a shit show. It was slow, it was painful. You could be a CAD monkey or a spreadsheet monkey or a simulation monkey. And it felt like the industry that created and invented the future had now basically stalled. Back when I was at Imperial College, I used to design hybrid rocket engines. These are really basic, really small 5-kilometer engines. And I was doing that with a team of 30. Now, back then, we felt this problem of collaboration. And actually, we found out that the reason the industry was slow is because it's very, very difficult for multidisciplinary teams that all work in different tools to be able to collaborate on one product. Back then, what we would do is we started to build internal tools for ourselves to link some spreadsheets, some MATLAB code with some CAD, with some simulations, and enable much faster collaboration. And we were able to reduce the design times from something like 8 weeks for a change to 3 or 4 times a day. When we had that insight, we knew industry was broken and we didn't want to go into industry. We knew we loved to design rocket engines. And we knew we had this secret sauce, which is if we're able to formalize these tools, we would be able to design rocket engines at 100th or 1,000th the speed of anyone else in the industry. So we started up, we called ourselves the Rocket Company, and we were building baby SpaceX in London. And we did that for 2 years. We were fairly successful. We started to design hybrids and then liquids. We sold some rocket engine designs out to companies in the US. We moved into energy, so fractional distillator design. And then after about 2 years, we had this holy shit moment. And the holy shit moment was, well, look, what we've actually built here isn't so much a consultancy that can design faster than anybody else in the world, but is an internal set of tools that enable us to do engineering in the way that we wish we could have done in industry. And if we were just able to take those tools, those hacky software API-driven tools, and make them easy and accessible for normal engineers, then we knew for a fact that every engineering company in the world would be designed this way. If you look at sort of macroscopic transitions, this same transition has happened in every field of engineering design. Software engineering 50 years ago was done slowly, fragmentedly, and it was really difficult to collaborate. We used to design software in these things called punch cards. And then eventually we invented an abstraction, a programming language. And today thousands of software engineers can collaborate seamlessly. The same story is played out in chip design. The same story is played out in gaming with game engines and animation engines. And what we're building now is this collaborative design platform that enables engineering teams to design products 100 to 1,000x faster than they can do today.
Well, thank you so much all for your stories. I just want to take a brief moment now to sort of encourage the audience members to submit any questions that they'd like to ask. After sort of we go through some of the questions that we want to talk about as a panel, we're going to answer, or the panelists are going to answer the questions that you have as audience. And there's a Q&A section or function on the right side of this platform. So please feel free to ask any questions. We'll get to them at the end of the panel. I think those are really, really incredible stories. And clearly you've all accomplished incredible things. I guess the next sort of question is, what has helped you get to where you are? And what advice would you give to others who are interested in setting off in a similar direction? Anthony, do you want to start us off?
Sure, yeah. This is kind of taking the second half rather than the first half. What do I recommend to others? Because it's something that we didn't do and I regret. I think for people thinking about your own entrepreneurial journey or something similar, definitely think about reaching out to people and try and find some mentors or people who are willing to give you a bit of advice. There's plenty of people who are willing to do that. I'm hesitant to say that like everyone on this panel is happy to, because I don't want all of us to suddenly get like 200 emails asking, because there's a limit. But generally people are really happy to offer advice, and you can skip so many like obvious mistakes just by having someone who knows a little bit and has done it before and is willing to put some time. But some of the other stuff that I've found personally, I found that probably the most advantageous thing, I mentioned like in a sentence in my own personal intro that my co-founder was my college roommate. And actually identifying people within your network who meet two really key criteria, which is like, sorry, I'll mute this. Which is that one, they're high integrity and that you trust them, but then two, that they actually have a fit with you business-wise. So that would mean, best friend who has the exact same skill set as you or no skills, bad co-founder. someone with a perfect complementary skill set, but you can't trust them, or you question their integrity, bad co-founder. Really, the most valuable thing that I think you can have is someone who you can work with reliably, someone you can trust, and who has complementary skill sets. So that's one thing I did have that helped, and another thing that I didn't have that you should look for.
Parry?
Yes. So just to sort of expand on that piece of advice from Anne, the best bit of advice I got on this is only take advice from people you'd be open to swapping places with, which is to say, literally everyone in the world is going to give you advice. A lot of it's going to be shitty. But the bits of advice that you can get from great people, you should absolutely listen to. I'm in a bit of a different situation to perhaps Anne, in the sense that I'm a sole founder. So I've been going a little bit longer by myself, but what I'll absolutely say is the team is everything. There are two big buckets here. The first is the team that you work with day in and day out. You're going to be doing, if you do a startup, you're going to be doing 13, 14-hour days for 5 years, non-stop, including the holidays, with these guys. So you've got to love them and you've got to really respect them. And the other side of it is absolutely all around the network. This is something I heard a lot when I was sort of coming into the industry, and I sort of ignored. I sort of felt like brute force my way to success. But people like Matt Clifford from EF have been absolutely wonderful. People like Charlie Songerst, Alex Brunicki. There are a small subset of people that you can really rely on when you need advice, because the pool of knowledge that you don't know is so big that it's very, very hard in the early days. So just a couple of mentors and a couple of guiders on that really makes a huge difference.
Natalia?
I think it's a fantastic question. And two things that really helped me in my career are passion and focus. And I want to share a small story from my life. For me, it all started when I was at the university back in Ukraine. And I remember we were watching BBC Channel during our English classes. And I remember watching those, market commentaries and market moves. And I saw those very big buildings that couldn't even fit on the screen. And I imagined myself being one of those bankers, working in one of those buildings. And at that time, it just felt so, unreal, impossible, especially being somewhere in London or New York. But, my passion for finance grew every single year. A few years later, I participated and took the second place in the conference that our university organized. I wrote a paper on the derivatives market. And this is where I understood that I really want to work in finance. I really want to, to find the best job here and study in the best university in the world. So I started focusing on two things, and focus is super important. So make sure that you prioritize things. I tried to make sure that I only have A+ grades when I graduate. And I also, participated in the internship. I did the 2 years internship, and studying and working at the same time wasn't really easy. But, it actually got me into one of the best universities in the UK, and I managed to get the scholarship. And a year later, I found my first job in the UK. I was looking into markets. This is what I was really passionate about. And again, passion and focus led me to the second job that I'm currently having. I'm a vice president at JP Morgan Private Bank. And, this is one of the world's largest banks in the world. And it's interesting enough, if you remember one of those buildings that I used to see on my screen, one of those buildings is actually headquarters of JP Morgan in London. So, passion and focus really helped 18 years old me to achieve those very, very big dreams that I had that at some point felt very impossible or unreal. So what I would suggest everyone is definitely make sure that you have passion for something, make sure that you focus on things, and also think big, work hard, and never give up. It will definitely pay off.
Great. Thank you so much. I guess just like off of that, you've talked sort of about advice, sort of what people can do. If you're a first-year university student right now, or if you're someone who's just graduating university, if you're 18 years old, or if you're 20 years old right now, what would you be working on, and what's the advice that you would give for someone to really make the most out of their university or post-university journey? Anthony?
Yeah, I have some counterintuitive advice, which is that personally, part of the reason that I pursued entrepreneurship was because I tried other career paths, and I just found they weren't for me. I found that a lot of kind of corporate setups had a large disconnect between the work you were doing and the value. And I realized it was really important to me to shape the culture of the place that I was working, because it's so hard to find somewhere that you just naturally click with. So I was like, oh, I want to go and do startups. And I think as I've done more and more time within the startup space, I realized that startups have their own prestige trap. And I acknowledge the irony of saying this sitting on a Forbes 30under30 panel at a startup conference. But I think that sometimes you end up in the same kind of trap of chasing prestige rather than focusing on enjoying yourself and creating something valuable. And I mean, the most important thing is having a good time. My number one piece of advice, if you're a first year student, if you're in your early 20s, is enjoy yourself. Don't put tons of pressure on yourself to like, oh my God, I didn't yet found, like, Mark Zuckerberg was 20 when he did, like, you don't need to do that to yourself. It's not productive. And actually, more likely than not, if you're here, the overwhelming likelihood is that you are a high potential person, right? And you don't need to be driving yourself crazy every single year because you didn't found the next Facebook. And also, you don't need to measure your success in how quickly you hit 1 billion in valuation. So yeah, I again, I acknowledge the irony of saying it in this position, but my biggest advice to, if you're first year, early 20s, keep your eyes open, try and learn from people, start taking an active approach, but don't put yourself under crazy pressure.
Harry?
Yeah, great advice, man. I'll sort of like double down on it and add my own perspective, which is doing comparisons with other people. It's absolute can of worms. Don't do that. What I will say is what you should be looking to do is be really clear on what you're optimizing for. For some people, it's money. For some people, it's prestige, and that's okay. It's okay. And for some people, it's impact. And I think for me, and probably for the people in this room today, it was probably being really focused around driving impact. So what does that look like? Well, if you stop what you're doing today and you do 18-hour shift in a hospital, you can probably have more impact than I am in my startup. That's probably a really real answer. But perhaps in the 5-year time frame of building a startup and doubling down and compounding that, it's a different story. So what I'll say is, like, look for where you can have impact that's 10x or 100x in the 5-year time frame, and then 1,000x in the 10-year time frame, and then 10,000x in the 20-year time frame, and get really, really good at something. The other thing I'll say here is give yourself room to screw up. One of the best things I did, sort of starting with a rocket company back when I was 21, was I said to myself, purely by happenstance, I was the youngest person in the year. So I sort of felt like after school and university, I'd earned a year to do what I wanted outside of the real world. So I gave myself a gap year, and I built the rocket company in my gap year. And I said to myself, on the 1-year mark of that gap year, if I hadn't raised a round of investment, or I didn't have a very clear sort of contractual path to raising a round of investment, I would kill the company on that day. And that sounds horrible, but actually it had the opposite effect. Things went very, very wrong in that first year. We had some terms on the table from an investor. Those terms went away. The investor scene got very sort of brutal against us. My team fell through. We had some family stuff going on, and it got really, really, really hard. And that happened around May, which meant I had 3 or 4 months to just do what I wanted, to see what I could do. So we basically lost, and we were out of the game, locked in for those 4 months. And then in those 4 months, we got really lucky and some magic stuff happened, and I worked really hard. And at the end of that 4 months, we'd raised sort of like, we had 2.7 million in pounds in commitments for our fundraise, and we raised 1.2 of that. So by locking yourself in and just giving yourself the room to go learn and explore, especially while you're young, is super, super duper important. And the last thing I'll say here is, if you're desperate to start a startup, don't start a startup and don't go work for one. The skills to build a startup are becoming hard to earn, hard to learn, but sort of there's a trivial part to this. The really important thing is to build a business where you desperately believe there's a need for it. And to understand that, you're not going to find it by building a startup. You're going to find it by going to the industry, realizing what's wrong, and then saying, I want to solve that problem, and leaving it to go start the startup. So if I was 22 and I was going to this again, and I was in a different world, I was in bio or comp sci, I would go into the market, I would spend 2 years learning about what's wrong and what's right. And then once I had a really clear belief and passion and vision for that, then I'd go to a startup.
Just one piece of advice from me here. If I were 18, 19, 20 years old, I would definitely take advantage of all the new technologies that are emerging here. Like, as you can imagine, 5 or 10 years ago, we didn't used to have, so much information or so many resources available. Like, even doing something what we are doing today would have been quite probably impossible, 5, 10 years ago. So my advice to you is really take advantage of all of that. If you want to, study a new course or do something online, you have a lot of choices online. If you want to study a new language, for example, you can do that online as well. And also you can connect with different people. This is something that internet and new apps and new technologies are offering you. If there is someone that really inspires you, right? Or if there is someone that you think this can be my mentor, or this is the person who can guide me in my career, I would just definitely take advantage of all the resources and information that is out there.
Yeah, Harry, I thought it was really interesting how you mentioned your sort of gap year and sort of the first few months, how much of a struggle it was and how things really went wrong. I'd love for you to respond or sort of expand on that, and I'd love for the other panelists to share their sort of stories. And sort of what were some of the biggest challenges you faced in your journey as an entrepreneur, and Natalia as a banker, and in your careers, and how did you overcome them? Harry, would you like to start first with your
Yeah, so happy to share the story. I think it's a fun story in like a really sadistic way, but also that there's a whole bunch of learnings in this, and I'm sure you and Natalia as well will empathize with this. So when we started out, we were a bunch of kids, we were a bunch of students, and we said, let's start the rocket company. When we raised our first round of investment from Seed Camp, the team actually hadn't met yet. I'd convinced someone from Germany to quit his job and get on a one-way flight, convinced someone from Imperial to drop out his PhD, and a friend to join me. And they actually met for the first time on the stage, going into Seed Camp to pitch, and I'd given each one of them their part of the pitch. We got our first sort of investment from Seed Camp on that day. And then the first year was a nightmare. We went very deep into the technical side. We had a vision for what we wanted to be able to prove out in the technology, taking these internal tools that we built for ourselves back when we were at Imperial College and sort of formalizing that and proving the ROI equation there. And we were successful. We had 3 months of really intense work. We did 14, 15 hours a day, every day. We proved out the technology. And then everything started to go wrong. One of the main people as part of the team turned out had some sort of deep cultural differences to us. We had a couple of people whose families sort of went into sort of tough times. And then we tried to raise a round of funding. And as I mentioned, we went out, we had no idea how to raise. We started meeting some Russian oligarchs and we asked them for 100K. They were about to invest and then they thought we were a scam because we were asking for 100K, which was more money than I'd ever heard. But for them, it was sort of like too small of a check to be real. So we said to ourselves, all right, what's the smallest amount of big money? And the smallest amount of big money is 250K. That's the smallest check that a VC will write. So we said we're going to go raise 250. We went from 250 to getting some traction on that, to a 500K round, to a 750K round. We had 3 or 4 of the best investors in Europe coming around to invest and co-invest. And then after a week or two, they were giving us funny emails. And a week later, we got a call from one of the investors saying, hey, so the new offer is 100K and we're going to take 10% of the company. I was like, what? And turns out the investor had a conversation behind our back and said, look, we're going to force the company to take a much lower valuation. And if they don't take the valuation, we'll spread rumors about the company, say they're full of shit and kill the round. So we had a really tough decision to make. Like, from our point of view, we said we either take this money from really great investors, but we get screwed, or we don't take the money and the company dies immediately. So it was a tough time. At that same time, the team had built were 8 people. These people were unpaid. They were coming on with sort of blood, sweat, and equity. And that started to go wrong. And we had a really rough couple of months there. What happened was we were locked in. So we said no to the offer. The VCs followed through on their promise to screw us. We went out to the US to raise money. I had £3,000 in my bank. I spent 2.5 of it on flights and travel. Ran out of money while I was there. We pitched 60 investors out in the States. And we got the same answer from most of them, which is, this is fantastic. We will definitely put in 20 million when you're ready, but we just don't do seed investments or pre-seed investments to European companies right now. And this is back in 2016. So this is a while ago. Long story short was we knuckled down, we had a few conversations, and one of the friends of the investors actually put in the first 100K personally. He said, look, I'm sorry about what happened. I'll put in my first 100K. And that 100K check got us to 250, got us to 500, got us back to 1 million, got us to 2 million and 2.7 in commits. And then we closed a round. By that time, the team had gone from 8 people down to just me. We'd gone from doing rockets to doing the engineering company, the software behind the rockets. And we had all the battle scars to prove it. In terms of like your question of what went right and what went wrong, I'll go back to my original statement, which is giving ourselves that line in the sand was really powerful. It meant even when everything went wrong and the company died in May, I was locked in for another few months. So I could do what I wanted. The second is we were surrounded by good people, and good people just like gave us encouragement and mentally were there for us. And that really made all the difference. And then the last thing is like, there is this naivete you have when you're 22, which is you can do what you want and you're right and you know exactly what you're doing, which was completely wrong, right? Like a lot of this stuff in hindsight went very, very differently. But having that passion that Natalia mentioned, having like a really deep, true belief that this is needed for the world and you will do anything in your power to go make this happen, and being really true to your convictions there makes a difference. So when you're young and you have deep passions and you're inexperienced, use it, because you can get a lot further than you think you can with that.
Yeah, that's such an interesting story. Natalia, do you have any interesting stories of how you've overcame challenges throughout your career as a banker?
It's a fantastic question. And let me share with you another story. The first time I came to London was when I was a student at the University of Warwick, and it was one of the events that London Stock Exchange organized. You know, I still remember that evening as it was yesterday, that very big building, those massive screens, and those very big letters that said London Stock Exchange. And, you know, that night, I really realized that I want to be here. I want to work in finance. I want to stay in the UK. And the next day, I started applying for jobs. And, you know, back at that time, I already had what I thought loads of achievements. You know, for example, I won the nationwide competition economics back in Ukraine. So I thought finding a job should be not difficult, but probably not easy, but not that difficult. And, you know, new country created new challenges. The biggest challenge for me was actually finding my very first job in the UK. So I started applying online and I was getting rejections. I was getting interviews and I was getting rejections. So at the end, I applied for 520 positions and I received 519 rejections. As you can imagine, having no and rejection so many times is not easy. And, you know, it's very easy to give up after your second, third, 50th rejection. But I didn't give up. And the reason I didn't give up is because I had that very big dream in my mind, you know, that night in London Stock Exchange, that I wanted to stay in finance in this country. Only one company believed in me at that time, and only one company, you know, gave me this chance. You know, a few years after, I was already a city banker. I was already Forbes 30under30 alumni. And I received an invitation from Forbes to participate in the markets opening ceremony in London Stock Exchange, that London Stock Exchange. So imagine me being on the balcony, opening the stock market, And, me as a Forbes 30 alumni, as a seated banker, and as a person who came here so many years ago to, with a very big dream in mind. And despite all the challenges that I had, didn't give up. It's interesting because I still have all those rejection letters in my inbox. There's a special folder called rejections. And you may ask me questions, why do I keep them? The reality is all of that really reminds me of who I am today and how I got here. And it also reminds me of how persistent, how perseverance, and how my hard work actually helped, young me to achieve my very big dream that I had. And that dream that I had that night when taking a picture at London Stock Exchange. So look, all of you, all of us, we're all having challenges, we're all having failures. But I think what is really important is never give up despite all the challenges and failures that you have and will have in your life. This is my story.
Thank you so much. Those rejections and sort of overcoming those rejections is definitely something that's really inspiring. Ant, do you want to take it away?
Yes. So remind me, the question is challenges that we faced, right? Or tough times. Man, I really relate with Parry's story. That's a good one. I enjoyed it. Very dramatic. They need to make a movie about you. But yeah, I'd say similar, maybe more focusing on one element that he had. So less the investment, more co-founders. So we did have an early co-founder with whom it didn't work out, right? And so one of my pieces of advice in the earlier statements was that I used the word integrity. I think particularly when you think about people that you want to work with, when you start a business, you do realize that the law. What am I advocating here? The law as writ and the law as actionable are two very different things, right? And that also applies to contracts, right? So everyone thinks stuff like, make a founders agreement, everything, whatever, get anyone in, it doesn't matter, I have a founders agreement. The truth is, and this is the case for team members, for people that you work with, so companies that you contract with and stuff, like contracts are more like, contracts are like car insurance, right? If you crash, you're going to be really glad that you have it, and you better hope that it's good. But really, the aim is to not crash. If you were at the point where you were using it, you've pretty much already, it's a bad situation. And so when I use the word integrity, and it's with team members, it's with partners, etc., you really want to be thinking about people where it's like, even if they had every legal power in their favor, would they treat me fairly? Just because they know it's the right thing to do, would they treat me fairly? And I know that it's the classic story, because I think most startups that fail, it's either co-founders fighting or running out of money, right? It's so important if you're going to think about co-founders, and especially as a young person, you gravitate towards your friends. Like oh my goodness, the number of students who start a business focused on a product for students with their best mates at uni, it's a recipe for disaster on so many levels. The most important thing is think about business fit, think about integrity, and that's a mistake that we made. There was a lot of kind of unnecessary arguing, and people focused more on like what was whose fault. I struggle to think of a specific anecdote, but that kind of, I think, highlights my point. And then I'm thinking as well, just fundraising. One thing that I have found is that for us, you have to acknowledge that as an entrepreneur versus a VC, VCs talk a big game in a specific way, but you have to remember that actually their business model and their desired outcomes are very different to yours as an entrepreneur, right? There are a lot of outcomes that are excellent for you, excellent for what you want in terms of impact, culture, your company, even your personal finances, that actually for them are like, I shouldn't have invested, right? And you need to try and identify those things, because otherwise you end up with guys like Parry was describing, where they're unsavory types, and basically the only thing that matters to them is, can I put a ton of money into this and get a multiple on it? Not, am I treating this person fairly? Am I helping, something that could have big impact proliferate? That was kind of a ramble rather than an anecdote, but yeah, do with it what you will.
No, that was great. Thank you so much. Yeah, I guess just sort of just moving on to the next question is, you're all sort of under 30, as the name sort of suggests, and there's a long kind of future in sort of your careers. So how have your respective fields or topics or industries changed in the past 5 years? And how do you envision, what do you envision will happen in the next 5 to 10 years that you're really excited about? Ooh, Ant, do you want to take us away?
So for me, I think like I said, I work in travel, or my core business, stasher.com, is in travel. And oh man, how is that going to change? I think there's a few things that are really going to shift. First of all, there's going to be another year or two where people are just getting more comfortable with travel again. So that means there'll be a huge swing towards domestic, and a huge swing towards rural, right? So, if you think about it personally, how many of you are booking, city breaks this year versus booking an Airbnb somewhere in the countryside? And part of that is literally because of laws, because of rules, and part of that is just because it's, even a year from now, people are still going to have it in their heads like, oh, but what if something happens and I get stuck there? It's going to take. I think the truth is, it's going to take maybe 2 years for people to normalize. We're lucky that suits us actually, ish. Super rural. Obviously, you don't need luggage storage, but domestic and vacation rental really does suit us really well. So that's fine. If it means people are going to be taking the train to Bristol for a long weekend and they'll be, thinking about leaving their bags on the way there, on the way back, that works for us. And actually, like in the last week or two, we've seen, with the UK reopening, great growth. Thinking otherwise, I know that within the kind of tech space for travel, increasingly there's kind of a move towards. 10 years ago, it was the kind of startup fad was Uber for X, right? And now there is a reminder. Uber's got a reminder for me. But now the kind of fad that I'm seeing, not fad because it's a legitimate business model that makes a lot of sense, is the kind of open banking for X, right? So particularly within travel, there's so many companies who are kind of saying, okay, Booking.com has got the stranglehold, and basically your only way to interact with that, if you have customers, is to become an affiliate for them, or refer people to that. And increasingly, it's like, actually now I can access the APIs so that I can sell that on and keep that commission for myself. And I do also see, particularly in the thing of Airbnb, ironic that Airbnb kind of stole a lot of traffic from Craigslist, right? People are now taking Airbnb and treating it like Craigslist, and they're saying, okay, there's so many little niches that I can carve off here and make a whole independent business out of. So like glamping, Airbnb that's LGBT friendly. Airbnb, I saw one recently, it was Airbnb where like the accommodation caters to people who want to smoke marijuana. There's so many little niches. It's now kind of like unpackaging, unbundling that. And particularly also, again, with the API thing, the introduction of channel managers, it really destabilizes like the kind of centralizing force of Airbnb. I have so much to say about Airbnb market. And then also like vacation rental managers. I don't know if people know this, but we always hear this stuff where it's like, oh, almost all of it's about 50% of hosts have, more than one listing, but people don't realize that, like, okay, that doesn't make it sound that bad. But those 50% of hosts who have more than one listing, a lot of them have tens or hundreds of listings. So really the majority of Airbnbs are now managed properties that are kind of small businesses operating within that. And I think we'll see kind of a rebalance of power where they will have pushback against these major platforms, because also now you have all these APIs where it's like, I can just list my thing on every vacation rental platform, not just Airbnb. Like I'm not locked into that anymore. So that's kind of a brief overview of how I think travel is going to change.
Natalia, how do you think finance is going to change in the next 5-10 years?
Great question. Look, I think obviously one of the biggest changes in the last few years or even a decade has been the rise of new technologies, right? But in my personal view, two of the biggest changes and significant changes have been emergence of environmental, social, and governance reporting from the companies, and B, the markets and investors actually paying attention to those ESG factors. So I think what happens next is, more and more companies will continue reporting on the ESG side, and the market will continue integrating those ESG factors, so environmental, social, and governance factors, into their valuation and their investment process. This trend is relatively new, and even I recently had to do a ESG certificate with the CFA UK to kind of understand this trend better. But I think from the banking perspective, this is probably one of the most significant and quite exciting trends that we're seeing right now.
Perry, what trends do you see within the engineering space, but also the startup space, VC space for the next 5-10 years?
I'm going to cheat. I'm not going to talk about 5 years. I'm going to talk about 20 years because I think that's where all the magic is. Bear with me, but I think this is the way how I think about it. If you look at the trend for the physical world, physical design, whether talking about the International Space Station or life-saving medical devices, has become exponentially slower and exponentially more painful. We've gone from year-long development cycles to decade-long development cycles. If you look at the A380, we've gone from $1 million development costs to $1 billion development costs for massively complex stuff. And if you look at this sort of on a plot, what you realize is the design on the physical world is getting exponentially harder, exponentially more expensive. And in the course of 20, 25 years, we go from $1 billion development cost to $100 billion development cost to $1 trillion development cost. We go from 10-year development cycles to 100-year development cycles. And we go from needing 1,000 engineers to design a product to needing more engineers that exist on the planet. So we're on this really unscalable trend. And that can look incredibly scary. If you look at the virtual world, it's the opposite, right? If you look at video games or you look at software, it's become easier and easier to design stuff. We've gone from year-long development cycles to month-long to day-long. We've gone from a PhD and 10 years of experience to a graduate to a 10-year-old kid that can pick up Python and use some open source libraries. We've gone from tens of thousands of lines in the code base to millions of lines in the code base under all the libraries that we use on a daily basis. So if you look at the 200-year time frame, there are two possible paths for humanity. Path one is Star Trek, and path two is the Matrix, right? Star Trek is we find a way to fundamentally solve this problem, and we go and we design massively complex hardware, and we see the stars, and we go invent transportation technologies and nanotechnologies and everything in that version of the world. And the other is a much more bleak version, which is we realize it's too hard and too painful, we don't give a shit. So we go into the virtual world, and the rise of VR and the rise of gaming and the rise of software is sort of already showing us that. And I'm a firm believer that we are going to be on the Star Trek world. And I haven't got a good reason for it, but it's just an innate belief in humanity and the progress that we've made so far. Now, if we're going to be on that generic path to a Star Trek-like universe, then we need to solve some really fundamental problems in the engineering space to make that happen. The first is the economics and the scalability of complexity piece. And that's where my company, the engineering company, is building this platform that enables teams to design massively more complex stuff in a fraction of time. We're going to need to solve really complex problems around additive manufacturing to be able to go from taking a block of metal and cutting holes in it to being able to print stuff from the ground up. And we're going to need new waves of generative type technologies to be able to make that happen. Now, those three fundamental tenets, design, which is my world, manufacturing, and the intersection of machine learning with design, are the big three things that are happening in the next 5 years. And if we get these right, then it's going to change everything about the engineering world. Imagine the software engineering world, pre and post programming languages, right? Pre-languages, there were 100, maybe 1,000 software engineers in the world. Today, there are millions. Pre and post game engines, pre and post chip design frameworks. It's a wildly different world. I think we're at this really interesting, exciting cusp where things are about to go exponential.
You sort of all discussed what you sort of expect to be the future within your industries. And I guess this is more of a personal question, but where do you see yourselves in the next 5-10 years? What are some of the goals? What are some of the things that you really want to accomplish in the near and far future? Natalia, would you like to kick us off?
Great question. And remember when I started, two things really helped in my life, passion and focus. What I see myself is in finance, because even after so many years in finance, I continue to have passion for this. I love seeing the market trends. I love understanding, what are the best companies out there. So if I have to tell you where I see myself in 5, 10, 15 years, it's definitely in this sector. And this is probably the message to everyone who is watching here. Even if you don't have passion right now, if you don't know, what you want to go for, try different things. Try to understand what you really want to do 24/7. This is, I think, one of the most important parts of being successful is to find something that you want to do 24/7, that you just want to work all the time. So for me, it's finance. For someone else, it can be something else. But I think it's very crucial, to have this passion and to focus on that passion for some time. So I'll be focusing on that.
That's great. Ant, do you have any goals? Where do you want to be within the next 5, 10 years?
See myself on my yacht in the Caribbean. No, I'm joking. I think from my perspective, it's a trodden path, but I do see myself kind of learning gradually and taking what I learn and being able to take kind of bigger bites, bigger steps. I know, so for example, with Stasher itself, we know that there's much more that we can do within the travel space. But then myself personally, I think I know that some of the biggest issues that kind of face us now can be addressed with business. My fundamental belief, and this shouldn't be surprising as an entrepreneur, is that the most effective way to address major issues that face society tend to be ways to find methods of aligning incentives so that it makes a strong business case to solve that problem. If you can find ways to do that, you can fix the problem much faster than if you are, banging on people's doors just trying to get them to care, taking a non-profit approach, those sort of things. Non-profits do great work and they're important, but I think if you can align incentives, it goes much faster. I think the biggest issues that obviously face us are climate change. It's pressing. It's one of the things that might force us into that virtual matrix rather than explode. Well, actually, it might also force us off the planet, to be fair. It's either way. But and the other one I think is really important, arguably maybe more important than people realize, is that we see a really strong destabilizing trend within global economics. Inequality is getting worse. And the fundamental fact is, Thomas Piketty wrote a huge book that can be summarized in one sentence, which is that you make more money owning stuff than working. And that's a problem because when that's the case, rich people will keep getting richer, and it just kind of you basically are like there's a hill where like there's a stable point, and we're rolling down that side, and it gets harder and harder to get back. And we're already seeing little things where like, oh, actually, you know what? When that keeps happening, that causes a lot of civil unrest. So I think the two biggest, we see little things for now. And we get little steps back as well. Like, okay, now Biden's president, like maybe things will get better. But I think over a kind of 20, 30, 50-year time frame, unless we see some big changes, there are big risks to stability. Like the EU is at risk of falling apart, and it's really easy to forget that it's only 100 odd years ago that people were killing each other in Europe in the millions, right? So that's kind of gloom and doom. But don't worry, we can do stuff about it. I think, like I said, climate change is a big one. Financial inequity and financial and economic inequality are two big ones. I see myself finding businesses that can help to align people to kind of combat those things. I don't think necessarily private business is always the right way to address that, in fairness, but there are definitely ways that you can help. So, I mentioned earlier, we've started a social enterprise, 3points.green. Check it out. Easiest way for people to make sure that understand their impact on climate change and do something about it by funding projects that weren't going to be able to happen without funding, that then will either reduce flow of carbon into the atmosphere or sequester carbon that's already in the atmosphere. And I do want to develop that more into something that also fights financial inequity.
Perry, you talked about your 20-year frame for the industry. How about a 20-year time frame for you?
Great question. I hate to be like just adding and stealing from what Natalia and Anna are saying, but like, I love their points. I think a really important point that Anna just mentioned is there's a difference between technology and actually aligning incentives to make stuff happen. Another way of saying this is I've spent the last 4 years in a really deep rabbit hole building technology that I believe would change the path of humanity, right? So NASA in the 80s came out and said the single most important thing they could do was build what we're building now, and they failed to do that for about 3 decades. So we went into a rabbit hole, and I got my team around the table back in 2016. I said, if we're able to fundamentally solve this problem, and we're able to build that technology, we change the path of humanity. We should open source it one night and we change the path of humanity. And sort of looking back on it, I now believe I'm wrong, which is to say, if you just build a technology, it doesn't change anything because people are set in their ways and things haven't changed. Only now, where we've seen our first few customers, we have customers that are designing satellites that orbit around the world, and they're designing satellites and our tools flow. We've got people that are designing next generation electric vehicles for inner city, clean, sustainable travel. We've got companies designing medical devices that sort of save people's lives on flow. That's real impact, right? That's real change. So for us, the big change in the next 5, but even the next 20, is all about going from a technology and a product, which is incredible, to a business that has helped engineering teams design things that they couldn't design. If in 5 years from now, I'm sitting here and saying the entire space engineering industry, from satellite design to rocket design, has been able to do in 5 years what they thought they'd be able to do in 20 because of our software, then that's real progress. If I'm here saying the oil and gas industry has found ways to reduce emissions and to do their designs and their oil extraction more sustainably, if I can say wind power is now 2% more efficient, but that 2% is across 100,000 wind turbines in the world, and that's impacted sustainable sort of energy connection at this sort of rate, that's a really, really exciting place. So I think really the next 5 years and 20 are about going from a technology that could change the world to a business that actively has.
Yeah. So now we'll take some questions from the audience. There's a question more specifically towards Perry. And Natalia, if you have any thoughts, feel free to jump in. The question is, do you have any thoughts on whether or not a PhD or DPhil is important for technical founders? Did you ever consider one?
Yeah, don't do it. Whatever you do, don't do it.
Love it.
I'm going to be quite deliberately quite mean here. The only reason you should do a PhD is because you want to spend the next 50 years of your life in academia. That's a really important part. It's the part we need. But I think a lot of people get to the point at the end of the master where they don't feel like they know enough, and they don't feel like they're comfortable enough, and there's sort of this emotional fear to diving into going to industry or diving in and going to thing, or even diving in and building technology. Like back when I was a student, I had an offer to go to Cambridge for 4 years to design ultra high precision manufacturing devices to build lasers that would go on to sort of really impact that world. And the best thing I did was turn it down. If you want to build technology that helps people, go do that. Don't do a PhD. If you want to learn how to build a company, go do that. Don't do a PhD. If you want to be really clear on what it is you want to do, and I think the only real path, and I've met one person out of probably 50 friends that have done PhDs that say, my goal in life is to be an academic, to write literature, that I can sit in this pretty office and write literature, I can take it easy, I can help students, and I can teach. And if your goal is that, definitely do a PhD. But if it's not that, you're probably lying to yourself and probably going to waste 4 years.
This guy speaks the truth. it's for me because like I didn't pursue I don't do a kind of deep tech pursuit, and I mean, if you think in consumer tech, obviously not. Why are you asking this? But I do have an opinion on this kind of more generally, which is that when you look at Oxford and Cambridge, right, I think the issue that we have is that we as unis, I mean, institutions like this and events like this are helping to change that. But when we think of entrepreneurship, we think of PhD spin-out, right?
Right.
And the problem with PhD spin-outs is that generally they actually make the exact issue that Perry had articulated, which is that there is a big disconnect between a great technology and a great product, right? And like a great product always beats great technology, right? If you can do something amazing, but you cannot turn that into something that actually matters to me, I'm not going to use it, right? And that's why, Oxford and Cambridge, there are great successes. I don't want to say every spin out is like not a success, but that's why, Oxford and Cambridge, when you think about it on the scale of international entrepreneurship, is not catching up to places like Stanford, right? There is no reason at all in terms of actual social capital or what human capital, whatever you want to call it, why Oxford couldn't be pumping out more huge, impactful companies than Stanford. But we don't angle towards that enough, right? Our conception generally as institutions is make a PhD, spin it out, and it just generally struggles to make that transition from technology to business.
I think. Sorry, Charlie, please.
Go ahead.
No, it's all yours.
Thank you. Thanks from my side. I think first of all is practical skills that you'll need, and secondly is really what you want to do in life. So if you think about practical things, for example, when I started in the industry, I had a lot of educational experience already, but on my first day on the trade floor, I realized that I really need to understand how that works in practice, which you really can only get with experience. So, and the second point is it's really back to earlier points as what you want to do in life. For example, I was doing CFA and working at the same time. This is incredibly difficult, but the reason why I did it and studied and worked at the same time is just because I wanted to stay in the industry and I wanted to understand practically how I can use those skills that I learn in practice. So 2 points, practical skills you will only get while working. And secondly is really what you want. You want to pursue academia, or you want to, be in real world and doing the real products and providing the real services.
I thought about this a lot in a slightly different reference frame. I think this is quite a nice way to articulate it. We're all sort of nerds, so I'll do a 2x2 matrix, right? Imagine 2 axes. On one axis, there's impact. And on the other axis, there's scale, right? What people assume is you do the scale problem first, which is technology, and then you try and find a way to make it useful to people. But actually, if you look at what we've all done, we've went and had impact first, and went and worked out exactly what was needed for travel in different countries. Natalia worked out exactly how to do trading in this world. And then once we get that working, we use technology as a lever to be able to go from one person that we're helping to 50, to 1,000, to 1 million, right? So technology is always a lever to go do things faster. But if you haven't fundamentally got a reason to help people and have impact, then you're out of the game from day one. And academia PhDs don't really fit into that bracket.
This guy gets it. For ages, I didn't get this quote, right? The Steve Jobs quote is, do things that don't scale, right? And for ages, I didn't quite get that. Because I was like, well, startups are all about scale. Like, how does that make sense? And I realized what the statement means is do things that don't scale to kind of learn and prove things, and then at some point it will make sense to find a way to scale it, right? Which your matrix kind of articulated. You do things that don't scale to identify, okay, this is the thing that people want. This is the impact I can make. But in fairness, you do need to think like it does need to be able to scale at some point, right? But you can do things that don't scale to learn how to actually have that impact, for sure.
That's a really, really cool idea. I never really sort of thought about it as a matrix, but yeah. Cool. We have a question from Mason Ke. Hope I pronounced that right. How did you identify your own strengths to decide on your career paths? Do you want to take it away?
This is probably just semantics, but I think the real question is, how do you identify your weaknesses? But it's just relative. It's semantics, right? Actually, no, I think it's distinct, because identifying your strengths is implying where you should focus. Identifying your weaknesses is more about first of all about humility, and secondly about filling people to kind of compensate for those weaknesses. I think that's one thing that, again, it comes back to the co-founder thing, integrity, fit. Part of what I was talking about with fit is you need to be honest with yourself. And I think like with the stories that we've shared, particularly thinking about Parry stories and Natalia, all the rejections, you are forced to have humility as a founder. I think one of the, Perry, you mentioned when you're in your early 20s, you think you're invincible, you think you know everything. And then you kind of have like a kind of crap time for a few months. Maybe you have some struggles and you're kind of forced to identify like, oh, these are, maybe there are some things I'm not so good at. How do you do it? How do you identify that? Failure, dissecting failure, I think is an easy way. And just make sure you're doing failures either in a time like Perry said, where you have the free time, or I mean, genuinely as a young founder, I think one thing that people neglect is that people talk about risk. People say entrepreneurship is risky. The truth is you have hugely asymmetric returns, right? Worst case, you've lost 6 months to a year, but you put something really interesting on your CV and you're going to do the same thing that you would have done anyway, probably apply to jobs, right? Best case, you create a company that, allows NASA to make rockets better, which is, at like half the scale. Or you're storing bags in every, urban area in the world on a given day. Airbnb has whatever, 1 billion people a year, you're storing 1 billion bags. Or you're VP of equities at JP Morgan.
I think I would just add that it doesn't happen overnight, right? So it's a process. And if I think about my journey, it really started at school. I realized that I really love math. But, at that time, it was very difficult to understand where I would end up being. I just, started a lot of math. And then by the time, I graduated from my school, I realized that probably I need to try economics because this is something that I'm very excited about. So, bit by bit, started economics and realized, actually, finance is something that I really like. And it's just, trying out different fields, different sectors. I mean, you probably studied a lot of subjects, right, at university. So you understand something that you're really good at and something that you're not good at. And I think it's very important to understand that there will be things that you're not good at and be okay with those things that you're not good at, because we all can't be good at everything. But there will definitely be something that you're good at, and try to play it and try to understand what exactly excites me. Because I think one thing is being good at something, but another thing is trying to really understand what about that brings me happiness, joy, success, like what is that? And again, a very important point, doesn't happen overnight. It's a trial and error. As you can see, like all of us, we all made failures. We all had challenges. But again, it's back to that point that even if you think that this is your strength and you fail, it doesn't mean that you're bad at this. It's just because, people that are successful, they will try, fail, trial and fail. And then this is, again, a process. This is what I would say. Yeah, it doesn't happen overnight. Try different things. And then you will have that aha moment where like, yeah, this is exactly what I want to do in life. And guess what? Even if in 10 years, this is not what you want to do, you can do something else.
Yeah, I really like the question. I think the question's almost a little bit wrong. It sort of sounds like, how do I find out what I'm good at and then go do that thing? Which sounds reasonable, but I think at 21, 22, it goes back to what Natalia said around passion, which is, what am I really passionate about and willing to be really unhappy doing something badly for 10 years because I'm so passionate about it, right? So over-index on, I really want to see this happen and I really want to see this work because I believe in it at quite a deep level. And then be okay with just sucking at it for a very long time. And when you suck at it, you'll do one or two things. You'll either get better, you'll learn where you're naturally good, you'll learn where you're naturally bad, and you'll find people that compliment you on the stuff that you're not good at. You'll find ways to double down on the things that you are. So the strengths and weaknesses stuff sort of naturally comes out, but always have it under the umbrella of what am I passionate about wanting to create in the world. And I think a really good gauge for this is, I guarantee you that Anne and Natalia both have had shitty two or 3 years. It's been really hard, it's been really painful, but neither of us would ever change what we did. So I think happiness is overrated, and like satisfaction is slightly different to that, which is be willing to suffer on something that actually you want to see turn to reality. And then the strengths and weaknesses stuff will just play out.
Really interesting follow-up question, especially on what you just said, Perry, from Kwong. And the question is, how do you judge when something you're good at? Like, how do you judge when something you're good at doing, when you're good at doing something, but you only need a little push versus something you're truly not good at doing? Like you said, if you suck, you're either, gonna get better, or you're just not. So like, how do you know when it's something worthwhile pursuing? I know you said whether or not if it's something you're really passionate about. But how do you know if it's something that's truly not the right fit for you, or if it is, but you just need a little bit of a push?
Can I say, I think what you said is right, and the point is that question misses. You need to be doing something where you don't care. If like you need to be doing it because you want to do it, not because you're trying to identify the fastest way to get to X, right? Because ultimately, the truth is, right? Look at Amazon's stock chart, right? Everyone's like, wow, Amazon's amazing, Amazon's so great. What people don't realize about like something like Amazon is how much of the value was made in the last year, or last 2 years, or last 3 years, right? And the truth is that when you think about compound growth, which is how most your skill sets, most startups, etc., in value grow. If you look at a compound growth graph, it goes like this, right? Or even a little steeper. At that very beginning point, it is very similar to just being flat or going up really slowly. And the truth is, it's really hard to tell which line you're on. The line that's going to go like this forever, or the line that's going to go like this because you're going to start learning stuff and start building on top of each other. And the truth is, you need to think about doing things where you care about it and you're passionate. So, yeah, because there's no way to differentiate. So you need to find another metric or another dimension to think about it on, which is, do I care about this thing? Or, which is, for some people, it's different dimensions. Like, does it afford me other things that I care about? Like, can I spend time with my family? And it's basically focusing on like, oh, am I getting on the exponential line right now? Is the wrong way of looking at it.
Jump in and say 2 things. First of all, don't compare yourself to. There is no metric. Like one person will be very different from other, even though they can be in the same industry, they can be doing exactly the same thing. That's why there is no such a metric that if I'm not doing what another person is doing, I'm bad. This is one thing, very important. Don't compare. This is your own journey. You will have your own failures and your own successes. And the second one is self-awareness, is understanding what you're not good at and being okay with that. If I can't sing, for example, or I can't draw, I should be okay with that. And, I should focus onto something that I'm good at. And again, a very important point when you're comparing, don't compare yourself to others. Make sure that this is your own journey with your own failures and your own successes.
One of the things here, it's an incredible bit of advice that I got, and I'm going to butcher the quote. But the quote that I heard from a mentor is, the people that go to wars that become veterans don't become veterans and fight 50 wars because they were the best army fighter in the world. They fight 50 wars because they stayed alive long enough to get good. Which is to say, if I look at Ant and Salia and I say, how are you now in your skill sets versus you 2 years ago? Both of you will say, like, that person 2 years ago was a giant turd, and now I can actually do stuff, and I'm semi-competent, but 2 years ago I couldn't do anything. And I guarantee if I talk to you 2 years from now, they're going to say the same thing. I'm going to say the same thing, which is 2 years from now I want to be semi-competent, and right now I'm a turd. I can't do anything right. And another way of looking at this is just, can you be in the game long enough to develop the skill set to get good? If you're studying at Oxford, or you're frankly here, like you're smart, you're nerdy, you're not competing on something that you're not fundamentally good at. So just stay in the game long enough to get good, and it will play out. I think that exponential curve that Ant talked about is also sort of true at the individual level, right? Which is to say, Jeff Bezos, the CEO, that's the world's richest man, isn't so much someone that's always existed, but it's someone that existed in the last year, right? He was able to add 100 billion in value to Amazon in the last year, but he wouldn't be able to do that from a skill set point of view 10 years ago. 10 years ago, that guy was worse than most of the CEOs around. So really focus, really work on what the thing you want to get good at, and then just give yourself the time. Something Natalia said towards the start, which is the 520 objections. I think we live in a world where we only need to get lucky once to get in the game. And if we get lucky once every couple of years, it gives us the fuel to stay in the game for a bit longer, and that's just what we've got to play.
I think that's really the perfect way to end this session. Thank you so much for your time. It's been truly wonderful. It's been great fun, and I've definitely learned a lot. And thank you so much for your time. And now we're gonna take a 5-minute break before our next panel. Great, thank you.